if I know the internet like I think I do, this is probably going to piss some people off. You know, this is apropos of nothing, but somebody recently told me that my background is not YouTube-y enough, that it looks a little too utilitarian. And it made me laugh because y'all know I'm a professional furniture maker, right? Like, that's the majority of my business, is making objects for clients. I make content because I really enjoy it. And as a former teacher, I want to continue to teach. But I am a professional furniture maker. And so having my actual working tools in the background is kind of important for my workflow. I think it looks nice on YouTube, but whether or not it's a proper YouTuber setup, you know? Now, here's the deal. We're going to talk about Festool today. And I know people love to get upset about Festool, and there is some reason to do so, right? They're expensive, I get that. Not everybody can afford to buy expensive tools, that's fine. But it's also just funny to me when people get upset that I use high quality tools. Or, for that matter, that they get upset when I use computers. They make the argument that it's not really woodworking, but don't you want to pay people who are good at what they do to be efficient at doing it? That they're not wasting your time and therefore your money? Would you want to pay your accountant who loves the art of taxes to do your taxes with an abacus? Or do you concede to them using a computer program to put your taxes together so you're not paying them 4 times as much? The idea that using machines or computers is somehow lesser than, well, that's an idea for an entirely another video, and we will do that video. But for today, we're talking about the green Kool-Aid, so let's dive into it. You know, people love to hate on Festool, but the truth is, this machine changed the game for small shops. This machine made mortise and tenon joinery fast, efficient, and easy so that you could do it on par with the larger shops who were doing these things with hollow slot mortisers or larger pieces of equipment that cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars with a piece of portable equipment that cost you $1,500. But this video is not sponsored by Festool. I'm not here to sing the praises of the Domino or of Festool as a company. What I am here to do is give you some workarounds for the equipment that Festool makes that I own that you don't need to purchase if you do not have the funds to do so. So let's stop talking about how good Festool is and let's start talking about how you don't actually need to purchase any of their wares. So since we've already got the Domino out, and it is probably Festool's most well-known piece of equipment, let's start with the Domino. What it does, why it does it, how we can replace it with a different thing. So what this machine essentially does is it cuts a slot in a piece of wood in order to allow you to insert what's called a floating tenon. Now, a floating tenon is really nothing more than a glorified dowel. It's a flat piece of wood with 2 rounded edges that fits into a routed slot. Now, the difference between the Domino and the dowel is not so much in the pieces themselves, as they're both long grain, mostly cylindrical pieces. The difference is in the slot in which they fit. So I've got 2 pieces here, one dominoed together, one doweled together, and let's take a look at them. So looking at these 2 slots, let's take a look at the Domino first. You can see along the width of the Domino, you would have long grain to long grain glue contact on both sides. Now, that's a pretty wide arch for the top of the Domino, so there's still going to be some strength in that glue contact surface, even though there's going to be a large amount of end grain glued to the side of those dominoes. That's fine. That still has some structural integrity, even if it's not ideal. Looking at the dowel joint, however, you can see because it's perfectly cylindrical that only at the very wide ends of that dowel is there true long grain to long grain glue contact. The rest is essentially end grain glue contact or some variation thereof. Now again, there's still a lot of structural integrity in that glue contact surface, even if it's not ideal. So when I glue this dowel in place, the thing's not going anywhere. So the dowel is plenty strong, even if it's not technically ideal. Now, for those of you who are a bit more into furniture nerddom, as I am, you may know the name James Krenoff, who was a furniture maker in the 20th century, and one of the most influential teachers of furniture philosophy, if you will. Krenov was a big fan of the dowels. Now, I didn't go to the College of the Redwoods, I admit. I'm only giving you information that I know from reading books or secondhand sources from many friends who did go to the College of the Redwoods, but joinery with dowels, he made cabinets for 50 years using this joinery. And this joint was around long before Krenov. He didn't invent it, he just kind of made it okay for furniture makers to use this past the age of, say, Tag Fried. But I admit, while this is a, again, technically superior version of the dowel, it is more expensive, it is not necessary. Just use a bloody dowel if you're mad at Festool. Oh, and for those of you who are mad at me for suggesting dowels over more traditional joinery like a hand-cut mortise and tenon, you know what's another underrated variation on the domino? Tip number 2. Are these tips, or am I just out here shitting on Festool? Regardless, item number 2 that you don't need, the track saw. Now, is the track saw convenient? Absolutely. Why? For 2 main reasons. Number 1, it's just a well-built machine. The tolerances are tight. I've never really had a bad experience with a nice fresh blade in there. I can cut through a 2-inch slab, no burn, no track marks whatsoever. It's just well produced. Number 2, and I think this is far more important, on the track itself, there is this little rubber edge here. That tells you exactly where you're gonna cut every time. It's really easy to put this thing down on a slab or on a piece of sheet good. It's got a non-slip track on it, and you can just make a cut, no fuss. However, this video is not a question about whether Festool is convenient, it's about whether it's necessary, and let me show you a different way. Yeah, dog, we're going old school. So here's what you really got to ask yourself about the track saw. What am I using it for? If you're getting a lot of finished edges on, say, slabs in thick material that you can't physically take to another machine to clean up, it's probably a good idea to get a proper track saw because you're going to get a much cleaner cut. It's going to be a more accurate cut than you can get with this setup. However, if what you are doing most of the time is just breaking down parts, say you're taking slabs apart in order to get furniture parts, or you're breaking down sheet goods in order to make cabinets, this will do just fine. This is literally the setup I used for years. This is a 7 1/4 saw from DeWalt, which has been a workhorse for me for what, a decade? I've got a piece of wood that I took to the joiner so I know this face is straight, and I know on this particular machine, as is the case for many but not all 7 1/4 inch circ saws, I know it's 5 inches from this side of the fence to the interior of the blade. I know it's 1.5 inches from this side of the fence to the interior of the blade. So I know my measurements. I can just strike a line the distance away from the place I need to cut, and I can lay down my fence with 2 clamps and make a cut. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. I ain't gotta think about it. Hell, I've used a level as a guide for my straight cut on a job site when I didn't have a straight piece of wood, so it can be done. Don't overthink it. The only thing I do want to say as far as a limitation for this technique goes is these clamp heads. They do tend to get in the way of the motor, so consequently I usually like this fence to be 10 to 12 inches wide. This piece being about 5 inches wide. You can see if I needed to make a deep cut, this motor would hit this clamp head. Not the end of the world, you can always work around it, you can always be clever, take multiple cuts, but it is a thing to be aware of. Next up on this list is the router. This is the OF 1400. It's a good router, guys. It's got a plunge base. It's nice and powerful. I particularly like the trigger being over here and the plunge mechanism being over here, as opposed to most routers where the on-off is somewhere off here and I have to take my hand off of the machine in order to go turn it on and off. The other thing that I like about this, and most of the reason why I use this machine, is because I can hook this up to my track from my track saw, and now I have this thing locked in place for when I need to cut dados and grooves. Of course, yet again, you don't need this setup. Let me show you how I did it for many, many years. You noticing a pattern yet? Now, just like on my track saw, what I'm gonna do is calculate the distance from the center of my bit to the edge of my guide. And in this case, on this machine, I admit it's a little bit stupid. It's 2 13/16 from the center to the edge. Why that is, I have no idea. DeWalt could have done better on this. However, knowing that, I can calculate that minus the offset of the diameter of my bit, the radius of my bit, and I can mark for center. But this has done me well for many, many years. I've used this technique with this particular machine hundreds and hundreds of times. It will get the job done. Remember, most of the time what I'm doing with this tool is cutting dados, and dados being used as registration points rather than structurally integral bits of joinery. Most of my dados are only about 1/8 deep, so I can do that in a single pass with this machine no problem, even though it being a smaller machine. So no need to get over fancy with this one, just buy the cheapest router you can and start cutting things. So those are really kind of the big 3 machines that I use in my shop that Festool makes. But I did want to give you 2 bonus tips because, 5 is better than 3, or maybe just more than 3. So, is this a good vacuum? Absolutely. You know what else works? And last but not least, excellent drill? Absolutely. You know what I really love about it? Is it has the capacity to be a driver and an impact drill and a hammer drill all in the same time. You know what else drives things and hammers things really well? Stop complaining. Start hammering. So friends, that's this week's video. I hope it was helpful, if not simply entertaining. I admit it's a little bit off the beaten path from what I've been working on with the table and then transitioning into a new commission. However, I was on vacation all last week in Austria. It was beautiful. It was delightful. 10 out of 10 would recommend. And I just wanted to get you guys a video about, because these are the things I think about, right? Like how do people feel about my use of particular equipment or techniques given my situation as a professional and your situations as primarily hobbyists. So if there are things you want to see me do or address, please do let me know down in the comments. And I've seen an influx of people who just get upset about my use of Festool products, so I figured I would address it and hopefully do so in an entertaining way and remind you all that it doesn't really matter what tools you have in your shop. The thing is, just make a thing. That's the important thing. Stop worrying about what everybody else has or does not have. Just make things. Enjoy the process. Stop worrying about the internet all the damn time and make things out of wood. Because that's the beauty of it, is it not? So, until next week, friends, cheers.